Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the MBOM podcast. I'm super happy that you're joining me for today's episode of the show. And today's episode of the podcast is a fun one, and also one that I think is super useful to you as a yoga teacher and a yoga business owner. I am joined by Di-Di Hoffman. He's a seasoned horticulturist and serial entrepreneur who slowly transmuted into a modern-day rainmaking geek. He works with wellness professionals who are tired of being the best-kept secret in their field. He's the founder of the Herb Academy, the founder of the BadassPreneurs Academy, the creator of the Perpetual Rainmaking Machine for wellness professionals, and host of the Badass Wellness Coach Show, which I was a guest on a couple weeks ago, so you guys should go listen to that episode. And today on the podcast, we are talking about how to use podcast guesting as a marketing strategy in your yoga business. And this is something that I did a workshop on with a couple other podcasting friends a number of years ago. It was super popular. We had great attendance on it, and we were able to talk through all the things that you need to know to be a podcast guest. And for me, it was really fun to have Di-Di's perspective on this. We're super aligned in terms of how we think and feel with things that you should not do if you want to be a podcast guest. So we start with talking about, why podcasts, the return on investment, how this can be beneficial to you. And then we get into the details of pitching podcasts and things that you should consider when it comes to actually figuring out which podcasts are best for you and how to actually get a podcast host to say yes. So I hope that this is super helpful for you as a business owner. Please reach out, let me know what you think. And before we get into it, I just want to give a little shout out to today's sponsor, Offering Tree. Thank you to Offering Tree for sponsoring the show. Make sure you guys go give them some love. offeringtree.com/MBOM. As you guys know, they are my number one recommendation for yoga business software, and they are really a one-stop shop for everything that you need in your yoga business. All right, now let's get into the podcast episode with Di-Di. Well, welcome to the podcast today, Di-Di. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
It's absolutely a wonderful pleasure to be here, Amanda. You've been on my podcast as well, so it's chatting with an old business friend, so it's really awesome being here.
Yeah, it's fun to flip the script and learn a little bit more about you. And I'm curious, where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you guys from Pretoria in sunny South Africa. So that's in the northern part of South Africa, sort of the Savannah area, very close to the Big Five country. So absolutely one of the more beautiful parts of Africa. It's warm, it's hot, it's sunny, and yeah, lots and lots of wildlife.
Oh, sounds amazing. I've never been over there, but it's high on my list for sure. So to start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Tell me, who you are, what you do, all of that good stuff.
Cool. Thank you, Amanda. I'm a commercial potted herb grower and herbalist. Also a past banting coach. Now, banting in South Africa is just another name for keto, although it's not as harsh as keto. It's a little bit more mellow than keto. And I slowly but surely transmuted into an online rainmaking nerd. I have two passions, Amanda. One is helping our indigenous traditional healers to incorporate modern medicinal herbalism into their treatment protocols. And that's all done online. I started the Herb Academy in 2004. So I've been doing that for nearly 2 decades now. And then my other passion is working with wellness professionals who are fed up with being a needle in a giant online haystack using the rainmaking strategies. And that's short and sweet. That's me and what I'm busy with.
Yeah, you have lots of really cool stuff on the go. So thanks for sharing that. And I think a good place to kind of start with our conversation is, can you kind of define, what a rainmaker is in case somebody's never heard that and they're like, I have no idea what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I love that question and I love answering it because some people have this picture when you tell them they're thinking of, somebody that's scantily clad, dancing around a fire in the dark, and chanting different things to come and make it rain. In ancient cultures, the rainmaker probably did that, but they were very much exalted. And the rainmakers had magical powers that they used to bring rain that nourished the crops, that fed the people and the livestock. So no rain, no crops, no livestock. And the people would weaken, they would have to move elsewhere or they would die of starvation. Now today a rainmaker is a person or a system who brings clients into the business. The cash that comes from those clients is the aqua viva, the lifeblood of the business. Without it, the business will weaken or die. Now, you and I, Amanda, the business owners, we are responsible for either being the rainmaker ourselves or for building a rainmaker system that can become the aqua viva of our businesses. And that, in short and sweet, again, is what a rainmaker is. We don't dance in circles. We use today modern online platforms, modern online technology to build our rainmaker systems.
Cool. I love that. I love taking from, this thing that was very traditional and, very spiritual in practice and applying it to the modern world that we live in and online businesses. I'm sure there's a lot of yoga teachers who can connect with that out there. And, we're going to talk a lot about podcast guesting, which is a topic that I'm really excited about because, obviously I'm a podcast host. I've had hundreds of guests on the show. I know you have a podcast as well, but I'd love to dive into why podcast guesting is a really great strategy for wellness professionals, and particularly for this concept of like quote unquote rainmaking.
Again, I just love that question, Amanda. And let's take a step back here. Our universal business goal as business owners is actually very simple. Our goal is to take total strangers and convert them into happy clients. Now, all of us know that those strangers do not simply fall from the trees. They don't simply come knocking on our doors. We have to somehow make them aware that we exist. Now, my friend Michael Port says, it's not who you know, it's not what you know, it's who knows what you know. Now, when you start with your yoga practice, getting those strangers and converting them into happy clients is actually quite easy, because you simply tap into your personal network. And there are very easy ways of doing that. I won't dive into that, but sooner or later, all of us, if it's a coaching practice or a yoga studio or whatever, you exhaust that personal network and then your challenge starts. How do you keep on finding new strangers to turn into happy clients? And as we all know today, there are many, many ways and way too many shiny things that we can try. But there are two of those that stand head and shoulders above the rest. The first one is expanding your personal network. I like to say that your network equals your net worth. So expanding your network, that's the first powerful one. And then the other one is harnessing the power of good old-fashioned word of mouth. And podcast guesting does both of these exceptionally well. Imagine the power, if you do this professionally, of adding one new business friend to your inner network every week. Now imagine that same friend putting you in front of, say, a 50 or 100 of their followers and saying to their followers, here's Amanda. She knows her stuff when it comes to solving problem X or Y or Z. That, Amanda, that's word of mouth on steroids. Now imagine repeating that process, say once a week for 12 weeks in a row. Just imagine where your business will end up. And that's the power of podcast guesting.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's always really cool when I have a guest on my show and then, they come back to me, via email or, have a chat or something like that. And they let me know, like, hey, there was like, a person or a couple people who reached out to me and started a conversation or bought a package or are working with me because they heard me on your show. I feel like that's always something that's really cool for me. Like, it makes me feel like, not only am I benefiting that person's business, but I've used, my kind of authority as a podcast host to connect somebody that was useful and valuable to somebody else, if that makes sense. Like I was able to use my network to help other people network.
Oh, I agree 100%. It's actually when you go on a podcast as an expert guest, you are actually borrowing the trust, the credibility, and the influence of your host. One thing that both of us know about podcasting, Amanda, is that we've got engaged audiences because we are in their ears. We are literally in their heads. So it's very much an engaged audience. And if I'm on your podcast, I have the honor of borrowing that. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. And again, with what you said about, guests coming back to you and saying to you, I did, made this connection via the podcast or what, that's just pure gold from a host's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what type of people do you think benefit most from the strategy of being podcast guests? Like, at what point in your career, your business, is this a good strategy to kind of use?
That's also a very important point. I think from a career perspective, the sooner you start doing it, the better. It's a slow process. It's not a quick fix thing. So the sooner you can start doing it, the better. But there are actually two types of people that it's not for. And let us start with who it doesn't work very well for. First of all, it's not for anybody who's looking for a quick fix. If you have to put food on the table, make it rain by the end of the month, podcast guesting is not going to work for you. It's a long-term investment. It's a long-term play. I like to liken it because I'm a food gardener. I like liken podcast guesting to the whole process of making a compost heap, preparing your soil, being very patient, not wanting to harvest a brilliant harvest or an abundant harvest in the first year, but working up towards year 3, year 4, year 5 in a food garden. So very important, not a quick fix. It's also not for someone not prepared to do the hard yards. A lot of people think podcast guesting is a shiny object, and you don't need to put a lot of effort in it. Yes, you can do it that way, Amanda, but if you want to be professional about it and if you want to leverage it, use it to make rain, you have to be prepared to put in that hard yards, and it's initial hard yards. Once you've built the systems, it becomes easier. And then last but not least, it's not for those that can only talk about themselves without providing any value. You have to go on to approach guesting from the perspective that your whole mission is to go and provide value to the host and to the host audience. So if you tick any one of those, I would say stay away. Don't you're on a rather go and dance on TikTok or whatever. And then let's look at those who will benefit from it. And yeah, again, I'm going to give you 4 boxes. See how many of these you can tick. The first box is it fits service-based experts like a glove. It works for products too, but it fits service-based experts better. So all of us in the wellness field, we're service-based. We might have courses, productized offerings, but we're essentially service-based experts. It also fits anyone that needs to educate their market. Again, that's all of us in the wellness profession. We are consistently and continuously educating our market. It's a huge for introverts. Those of us, like myself, that don't like to share our personal lives on Instagram or our families on Facebook or, as I said, dance on TikTok. And then it's a lifesaver if your knees turn to jelly when you have to get on a stage to speak. And just speaking of speaking public speaking is still the most powerful way to become a recognized authority. So yeah, Amanda, if you tick one or more of those, it's a match made in heaven for you. It's like basil and tomatoes, rosemary and lamb, dill and beetroot. The two are just made for each other.
All right, friends, we're just taking a quick break from the podcast to talk a little bit about Offering Tree. You guys have heard me talk about Offering Tree so much on the show, and that's because I truly love their business. And one of the things that I really love about Offering Tree for yoga teachers is that you can scale your business. You can create engaging digital content, video libraries, courses, challenges, and coaching programs that can meet your clients and students anywhere at any time. You can also plug seamlessly into your membership and packages to offer added value to your loyal clients. At any point, you can go from just offering classes to also offering courses, coaching, one-on-one privates, memberships, and so much more. And all of that is easy to do in one place. You don't have to look for other software, you don't have to pay other pricing plans, and so much more. Plus, with templates and integrated website features, it's super easy to get everything you need for all of this stuff up and running and launched before you know it. So now when you have an idea for a new program or a new workshop or something like starting a membership, you can just make it happen with their services. So if this sounds interesting to you, head on over to offeringtree.com/MBOM. You can do a free trial here or get a discount for listening to the show. Once again, offeringtree.com/MBOM. All right, now back to the episode. I love that. Thanks for that. And yeah, I think I resonate with so much of what you said, but I really want to reiterate the point of it's probably not for you if you're just somebody who's going to be, talking about yourself. I think the idea of creating value for the audience is really huge. And this is something that I always look for, right from the time that I receive a pitch from somebody, you can really tell in that. And we can dive into that a little bit later in terms of how to actually use this as a marketing strategy in your business. But before we get there, I kind of mentioned this before, but can we talk about, the return on investment with this? Because if we are using it as a marketing strategy, in general, you don't need to pay to be a podcast guest, but there is time and energy that goes into it. And then obviously you want to share, the episode that you do so that you can kind of reciprocate with that podcast host and build a good relationship. So, why would it be beneficial for somebody to think about podcast guesting in terms of return on investment?
Again, I just love that question. And the short answer, Amanda, is that it's an absolute massive payout. But let me give you an hypothetical example to illustrate so that your listeners can get a sense of exactly what the payout is. Because as I've said, there is an investment, especially at the start, to build a system. So any one of us today, we have to choose very wisely where we spend our time. So let's look at a hypothetical example. The average number of downloads per podcast episode is about 200. And that's on the upper end. And that's not hypothetical, that's a fact. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but just imagine for a moment what 200 people together look like. It's a large crowd. Even for us South Africans that have huge family and friendship gatherings, 200 is a lot of people. Now, most podcast hosts will give you such a glowing introduction that you'll actually be looking forward to hear yourself sharing your expertise. And that's massive, and we've already mentioned it because it gives you instant third-party credibility and that borrowed trust. Now, you and the host, when you do the recording, normally you will find that if you've done your preliminary work correctly, you and the host will slowly, during the conversation, you will start building a relationship. And what most often happens, when a recording stops and the host was impressed with what you've done and how prepared you appeared on a show, she would say something like, "Oh, wow, Amanda, thank you so much for sharing so much value with my listeners. I'm hosting a virtual summit and I would just love for you to be one of my speakers." And that's huge. It's really huge. In the professional speaking industry, that is known as a stateside referral. Now, let's say that did not happen. what most professional guests will do at the end of the recording, they will ask the host if she knows any other shows that she can introduce them to. And that's also huge because it's also a stage-side referral. Now, let's fast forward to the day that the episode airs. Listeners who have subscribed to the show, tune in and listen. And as we've already said, and like the listeners listening now, we are literally in the heads. The host normally blasts, not normally, always, blasts social media and the email followings, and people who have never ever heard of you before see your name. And yeah, Amanda, we both know, as podcast hosts, we have larger social media and email followings than we have podcast listeners. And that is absolutely priceless exposure. Next thing, your phone rings. It's your mom. Di-Di, I see on Facebook that you were on a Manners podcast. I'm so proud of you. I've already shared it with Uncle Bob because he's always telling everyone that your coaching business is just an excuse for not having a real job. Thanks, Mom. Really? You shared it with Uncle Bob? You get off on the phone with your mom, go to your website. 15 people have downloaded your freebie. And those are all warm leads. If you nurture them, they will eventually buy when they are ready. Next thing, you open your email, and there's an email that reads something like, Di-Di, I've just listened to your conversation with Amanda on MBO. I need to get my name out there, and podcast guesting will fit me like a glove. How can I work with you? And if all that is not enough, you start repurposing the content from that episode. And if you do that, you can effortlessly create a whole week's or 2 weeks worth of blog content and social media posts from that one episode. So let me summarize. With just one expert guest appearance, you can get your voice in the ears of your potential clients. You can generate new email subscribers. You can get new clients. You can create a week's worth of content. And my bonus always, I'll wipe the smirk of Uncle Bob's loving face.
Thanks for sharing that. I was just kind of laughing a little bit to myself with your example of like your mom saw it, shares it, sends you a message. I shared it with the family. I feel like I can relate to that a lot. It's like in the early days, I feel like my mom didn't really understand what I was doing, but she was like always good for a share or a like, and she still is as well. So it's great to have that, and I just really love that. But those are really, really great practical tips in terms of like, why should we think about this as something that would be worth our time, worth our energy? And so one thing I'd like to chat about is, how we can actually go about getting on podcasts, because I feel like there's probably people who are like, okay, cool. This sounds really awesome. I'd love to be a guest. Maybe they're like, hey, maybe I could, pitch Amanda or Di-Di and get on their shows and start getting myself exposure. But I think the way that you actually go about doing the pitch is really key for whether or not you actually get on the show, right? So I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts around that, some strategies you suggest, and all of that good stuff.
Cool. Again, I love answering this question because, this is my jam. It's my wheelhouse. And again, I want to take a step back and just give your listeners a little bit of a foundation. And there are actually 4 things that you need. And the first thing you've already mentioned is you have to make that decision that you want to be on a guest on a podcast. You can't sit around and wait for hosts to reach out to you. It's never going to happen. You will continue to be the best kept secret in your space. So first, just make the decision. The next thing is you need what we call a rainmaking playbook. And rainmaking, the way we approach it, is first and foremost an approach that we use to build business friendships. And the terminology for me is very important here because I'm not just building business relationships. I'm trying to build business friendships. I'm trying to expand that inner core circle of friendships of people that I know. And to do that, you need that playbook. And the playbook is just a game plan for how you will incorporate your rainmaking efforts into your business, because we don't want to bolt this on as an extra. Because the moment you start bolting it on as an extra, it becomes work, and it can become a drag, because I can assure you, when you start out, you are going to get probably more no's than you are going to get yeses. So you have to have that game plan in place. And it's super simple to create that personal rainmaking playbook. In fact, it's so simple. I teach it to my students in just a short hour masterclass, and they go, "Ooh, really? Is it that simple?" And yes, it really is that simple. And that brings us to the third thing, what your main question was, and that is, you need a recipe to get yourself booked on the best podcast. In other words, you need a booking system. And I think of the booking system as the making those rain clouds. And there again, we start with a plan, we revisit our growth goals, and then we decide how many guest appearances we need to make in a month to reach those goals. And most experts aim for around about 2 a month. You can go for 1 a month, but again, it's not a single fruit tree strategy. It's an orchard strategy. The more trees you can put out there, it's something that slowly accumulates. So most of our students go for around about 2 guest appearances a month. And then you decide on the topic you want to share with your audience. And we simply write it out as a podcast positioning statement. And the podcast positioning statement reads something like, I want to appear on podcasts that talk to the audience about the topic. You have to be very, very clear about this. And I think you know, Amanda, how many pitches you get from guests that want to be on your show that is totally unrelated to what your show is all about.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And so with that, it's like, and this is something that I experience quite a bit that I would like to kind of, I guess, like leave listeners with in terms of like, this is something we should make sure that we're not doing. Like I receive quite a few pitches that I feel like are not really relevant to my audience, to my show. I'm kind of like, did you even read like the description of my podcast? I feel like this is super important, like finding shows that your message and your brand and your philosophies and what you have to share is aligned with. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. We actually follow a system for, first of all, selecting the podcasts. So I call it podcast selection criteria. And you make a hot list from that. And basically you will start with that positioning statement so that you pitch the right, so that you make a list of the right podcasts. Then you will actually go read the description, make 100% sure that it's a relevant audience, it's a relevant topic, and also that you resonate with the way that the host is approaching our audience and the subject. Again, our purpose, if you use it as a rainmaker strategy, is that we are trying to initiate and seed new business friendships. So I don't want to start a friendship with somebody that simple example, if I don't like swearing and the host swears, it's not going to work for me. It's not somebody that I would like to have in my circle. So approach that first research of you sort of with a gut feel. Is this somebody that I want in that inner circle of mine? And then just make sure that the podcast is still active. The podcast fades around about episode 8. So make sure that there are recent releases of the podcast. And then another simple thing is just check that they accept guests. A lot of podcasts are solo episodes. It's no use going to try and pitch somebody that doesn't accept guests or are in a season where they are doing solos. So those, it's a no to any one of those 3 criteria, it's an automatic disqualification. We won't go any further with adding it to the list. Then we add 4 what we call, let's call them ranking criteria. because there are so many podcasts, we need a way to differentiate and sort of sort them and rank them. And the first one is we look for something in the region of 25 published episodes. They're still finding their feet when they're there, but they're established and it's part of their business model, and they're making an effort with that. Then we also look do they publish show notes. There are hundreds of podcasts out there that are only on the podcast hosting platform. They haven't got a website. If we're using this to build friendships, we need somebody that we can add to our network that's referable in terms of go and have a look at Amanda's website. So we look at that. And then, do they have an email list? It's not an essential criteria, but it's helpful if they have an email list, because then I know that this host will most probably also advertise or promote their own episodes to a following, and that gives me that additional exposure. And then last but not least, and probably the most important today, are they active on social media? We do a lot of research on podcasts, and our hosts that are just not active on social media. And that makes the pitching process difficult. So if you tick all those 4 or 7 boxes, the first 3 and then the last 4, you've got somebody that you can actively go and start pitching, which is a different process.
Hi, friends. We are taking a break from the podcast so I can tell you about a software that I have recently discovered that I am super stoked about. It is called Coach Pals. Coach Pals is a wellness professional network. Their advanced search engine allows you not only to find, connect, and collaborate with like-minded individuals, but will also match your professional identity to the needs of hundreds of users around the world who are looking for your services or products. Coach Pal's profiles are exclusively designed for wellness professionals. Users will automatically be able to access all the important data to set their confidence. From your biography, skills, experiences, and certifications to your website, social media, podcast, contacts in your network, testimonials, skills, endorsements, and so much more. So how does it work? You sign up for an account, you create a profile. On mine, you can see things like my yoga teacher trainings, my business degree, my podcast, and then I can tell you a little bit about what I offer. If you're interested in that, you can click on the links or you can connect with me and we can become a part of each other's networks. It's pretty cool, and I think it's a really awesome opportunity for us wellness professionals to get to know each other in an environment that is not social media, where we have so many inputs and so many distractions. So if you're interested in checking this out, head on over to coachpals.com. You can create a profile for free. You can get a feel for their platform. And if you like it, use Embiome Pals to get 3 months off completely free for the professional membership. Once again, that's coachpals.com, and use the code MBOMPALS to get 3 months off the professional membership. I would love to see you there. All right, back to the episode. Yeah. Thanks for sharing all of that. Because I think that, we talked before about that return on investment, and obviously doing all of this is your time. And I think it's important to make a good effort when it comes to finding the right fit and finding good shows to make pitches to. And so it's like, doing that research is going to be so helpful, because why craft a pitch and find contact info and send it out if it's not going to be a good fit, or like you said, they don't accept guests, or maybe they're not podcasting at like the level that you would like for like a professional connection, that type of thing. I'm curious if the next thing we can talk about is, so, you've looked at these things, you've made a list of podcasts, you've got some contact information, what do you like to see in a pitch to actually, get that yes when you send something out?
Oh, I love that question. I think yourself how many pitches in our emails we don't even reply to because they're just so awful. They just don't warrant a reply anyway. And again, we have a process. I'm a left-brainer, total left-brainer. My wife says I'm OCD, but I always challenge that one. But I like a checklist, step 1, step 2, step 3. Because if I do that, I know that I have a process that I can improve on. And I laugh about this one because it's very important that even though I follow a 1 step, step 2, step 3, step 4 process it's very important. We're working and we're trying to build a friendship with a person, with a human. And I don't approach my wife with a checklist. I'll get the wrong side of her if I try and do that. So be very careful how you approach this, and please keep that in mind. The first thing that we will do is that those podcasts on our short list, is we will actually go and get on their radar. So we will go to their social media and connect with them and start interacting with them. And that's also part of process for me, because I use that interaction in the beginning, again, to just validate my gut feel that this is somebody that I want in my network. And don't just send loves, send comments, especially if it's somebody that's got a huge social media following. You will probably find that you will have to do comments to get onto their radar. And do that for a week, 2-3 weeks. I never rush that first part, because I like to get that feel, for the simple reason, again, I'm going to invest effort into building this long-term friendship. So I want to make sure that my gut feel is correct. Once you're on their radar, go to their podcast, find an episode or two that really resonates with you in terms of title and description. Listen to the episode. Make notes of what you've loved from that episode. And then go to iTunes or Spotify. On iTunes, you can actually leave a star review and a written review. Spotify is a lot easier. They don't have a written review. You just give a 1 to 5 stars and be honest about that. Leave a star review. Take a screenshot of the review that you've left. And then you use what we call the poster boy strategy. You reach out to that host and you tell the host, listen, Amanda, I've listened to episode X. I really resonated with whatever the message was. I actually took your advice, applied it in my business or in my life, and this is the results I got. I really love your show so much that I actually gave you a 5-star rating. Please see attached, and then you attach that screenshot that you've taken. And again, you have to be honest about this. You have to approach this with integrity. Don't make it a mechanical process just to get onto a podcast. You're trying to seed and make contact for a friendship. Most hosts, once you've reached out in that way, will reply. We all like to hear that what we've shared actually helped somebody. And then you have the start of that brilliant relationship. And the next thing, it's very easy to do that pitch. And the pitch can be, again, very, very simple. It can simply say something like, Amanda, I had she will reply, and you can return and say, thank you. I've had a look at your podcast. I see you haven't covered my topic X. That's your jam. That's your wheelhouse. I would love to be a guest on your show and share this topic with your audience. And again, I think the pitches that I get that look like that, 100% of them land on my show as guests. Does that process make sense?
Yeah, no, that's really, really thorough. So thanks for going through that. And I really resonate with what you're talking about. And I know there's people out there that are probably like, man, there's like so much that goes into it. Is it worth it? And, we talked about before how it really can be for the personal networking and recommendations and word of mouth and that type of thing. But I think it is, I just want to reiterate that I think it is so important to just go through this process and for not to just be like, say you're a yoga teacher who wants to get on yoga podcasts, just search like yoga podcasts and then just send out the exact same pitch to all of them. I feel like as the podcast host going through the pitches, you can really tell when people are doing things like that. And I think one other thing I'd like to chat about just quickly is people putting pitches for things like, hey, I just released a book or I just released a course. Like, I would love to come on your show and talk about that. To me, I'm just like, that's not like maybe your book is valuable to my audience, but doing an episode just talking about your book is not something that's valuable to my audience. So if we're going to do an episode together, it needs to be on something that you're an expert in. And I always give somebody a chance to share about themselves. I'm curious your thoughts on that. And maybe if you agree that that's kind of a poor strategy.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. I just hate it when somebody approaches me and I can feel with a stick that all they want to do is they want to use my podcast and my audience as a marketing platform. And really, I don't even reply to those. I don't know, it's rude. I try to be very, answer each and every email I get, but those I don't even answer. What's worse still is people employing these podcast booking agencies. And then you get this generic email that's 5 pages long that you have to read through about how good this person is, and never ever telling me in that whole email what they actually are going to do for my listeners. And I'm championing my listeners. I'm the one that have to look out for them. So if you can't pitch me on something that's going to really bring value, and you have to have listened to my podcast, otherwise you will never know what my style is, how I talk to my audience, and what type of problems I'm helping them solve. So I agree with you. It's a process that actually weeds out the weeds, because only the people that are serious about this and that are professional. Because again, Amanda, if I'm pitching you to be on your show, I have to be professional about that, because you're a professional. You handle your show as a professional. So I can't come unprepared, bringing a generic pitch that I'm blasting out to hundreds of podcasts. And like I always say to my students, it's not a numbers game. It's not a numbers game, but the numbers are important. And that's why we take all this trouble to make sure that we are putting our best foot forward every step of the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you actually brought up something there too that I also wanted to pick your brain about, and that was the podcast agencies, because I feel like more and more these days, that's where I'm getting the podcast pitches from. And there's a couple that I feel like I've built relationships with where I've been able to be like, okay, this guest isn't a good fit for me. This type of guest is. And they kind of are able to send me guests where they're like, hey, I think this one would be a good fit, as opposed to just being like pitch, 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 pitch. And that I feel like I'm okay with. But in general, yeah, the types of pitches I avoid are definitely like the press release book ones, like, especially if I'm like BCC'd on an email, I'm like, no, I'm really not into this. I'm not responding to it. And then, yeah, very cautious about the agencies, because I feel like obviously people are busy. I get that, if you're running a business, maybe you're a parent, you're a partner, you've got family, you're working full time. It can be a lot to do the steps that we talked about. But at the same time, it's like, how am I supposed to know that you know anything about me or my show, or have actually listened to know my style, like you mentioned, if you've hired an agency to do all of this for you? Like, how am I supposed to have trust in the fact that you can show up for my show and in the way that I need for it to be beneficial to my audience, if you can't take the time to, actually go through the process of learning about me, my show, my audience, et cetera, et cetera?
I totally agree with you, Amanda. You're absolutely right on the money. And I'm not trying to bash the agencies. There are two that I work in the wellness space with that I think are really very, very good. But my main gripe with them, first of all, is that for myself, from a podcast host perspective, is that the agency controls and has the relationship, because I'm building up that business friendship with whoever I'm working with at the agency. And my purpose of my podcast is that I want to build those business friendships with my guests and the hosts that I appear on. And the agency, being the middleman, they control that relationship. That's the one side of it. The other side of it is that because of the fact that they control the relationship, if you are not well known, if you're not a thought leader already or a legend in your industry, it definitely will pay you to do this in-house so that you can build up those relationships and control those relationships yourself. But on the other hand, if you are that thought leader, if you are a legend in your industry, if you are a well-known name and everybody knows you, and you're so busy that you can't spend this whole process time, then I would say definitely go spend the money, and they are not cheap, they are very expensive. But then I would say go and spend the time, save your time and spend the money if you are a well-known person. But for my students and the people that I work with and the network that I build in, it's much better to build that capability in-house. And the nice thing, Amanda, is it sounds like a lot of work, but once you've got that system worked out, you actually, we'd call it a podcast pitching sprint. We set aside a day or one morning a week or whatever, and we just go through the steps, blah, doof, 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 and we send out the number of pitches that we have to do for the week, that for the shows that we want to get on. Or we build a system and then we give it to our VAs. It's really something that, apart from listening to the show, making that social media contact, sending that pitch, that you always have, in my opinion, you always have to do it yourself because you want to build that friendship. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is you can easily build the systems in-house and still benefit a lot more than the high flyers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. And I think there's totally ways that you can use, your assistant or get a virtual assistant to help with this. Like maybe they can kind of, narrow down some podcasts for you to check out. And then maybe you write the pitch and they can send it on your behalf. Like, I think that being realistic in terms of like people are busy and whatnot. And I'm a big fan of outsourcing, but I think that, like you said, I think you being a part of the process and the pitches coming from you is huge. And I can really resonate with what you were saying about, I've had people who have followed me on social media, they're engaged, they listen to the podcast. And when they send through a pitch to be like, hey, I've been like a long time listener of MBOM and I'd love to be on the show. It's like, I know that they're genuine about that because they've talked about like, hey, I've listened since this point in time and it's been so cool to see the evolution and I've been evolving as well. And you've been a part of that. Like, I'd love to share my story. This is what I do. And those are the pitches that I really love receiving. And the most out of all the pitches, because I'm like, oh, cool. This is somebody like in my community. This is somebody who really gets what we're doing here. And I would love to, hear their story and, share their business on the show and help them grow as well. So yeah, all of this has been so helpful. Di-Di, I'm curious, is there anything else you want to share today in terms of like anything we've missed in terms of how podcasting and being a podcast guest can elevate your business?
Yeah, I think, man, I want to reiterate what you've just said about, somebody from your own community. And that's why we've designed that little process. Because my function as host of my podcast is to serve my tribe. And if one of my tribe reaches out to me, and I can validate that they are a member, one of my listeners, there's no ways I'm going to brush them off. I'll go out of my way to have them on that podcast. I'll go out of my way to help them because that's what I'm there for. So yeah, again, I agree 100%. Amanda, yeah, just one thing that I would like to just underline again, and that is you have to approach your physical, when you get onto the podcast, you have to approach that in a very professional manner as well. So I see a lot of guests, and I think you too, a lot of guests come onto my show and they just want to wing it. And that sometimes or most of the times don't come off that well for them. If you're an experienced host like yourself, I'm not there yet. I think I'm publishing my 76th episode only tomorrow, so I'm not as experienced an interviewer as you are. But in most cases, I can rescue an unprepared guest. If you listen to that episode again, you can feel with a stick that they just came on there, they weren't prepared, they didn't have a good message that I wanted to share, they didn't do the preparation, they don't have a call to action. They know I'm going to ask them to share a freebie, and they share a totally unrelated freebie to the topic. And then I sit there and I go, wow, we've just spent 40 minutes discussing this topic, and now you share a freebie that's 5 recipes for making chocolate brownies, totally unrelated. So I just want to reiterate that point, that getting on the show, that's the booking system. You need a whole other system that actually leverages each of those appearances, and we call that the rainmaker, the rain harvesting system. So be prepared. And then my pet peeve, please, if you're a guest on a show and that episode airs, please share it. It's just good manners, first of all. Secondly, it actually helps you amplify that whole appearance, because you can go out there and you don't have to go out there and promote your own appearance. You can go out and prepare your appearance on the MBOM show. And that's a big difference, and it builds relationships. In the same vein, don't disappear after your episode have appeared. Keep in contact, because you're trying to build a friendship. And that's actually two things that, if you're a professional guest, I tell my students, when you go onto a podcast show, appear it like a professional speaker will approach a speaking gig. Pretend in your mind that you're actually getting paid. You're not going to get paid, but pretend that it's a $5,000 speaking gig, that episode, and just see how your mind shift changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I love that idea of preparing like it's a $5,000 speaking gig, because I mean, if you nail it, it could be a $5,000, speaking gig, right? Because you could, like you said, bring people onto your email list, they're warm leads, maybe they're interested in your services. Hopefully they are, that type of thing. So yeah, I love all of that. And I know there's so much more to cover in terms of, once you're actually on the show, becoming a good guest. So perhaps we'll need to do a part 2 or something like that. But I feel like here is a good place to wrap up. Di-Di, I know you have so many great resources for people. Could you share with people where they can go to find your podcast, all your freebies, resources, how they can work with you, all that good stuff?
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, what we've done is, in my heart, I'm a curator. I'm not a know-it-all. So what we've done is we've actually curated what we call the professional podcast guesting toolkit. And it's a toolkit for anybody that's starting out. It's swipe files, it's checklists that you can use to get yourself into this whole guesting thing. And if you're an experienced guest, it will also work for you. And it's available from our website. The website is BadassPreneurs.com/MBOM. So it's just MBOM, BadassPreneurs/MBOM. Go and download that toolkit, professional podcast guesting toolkit. You'll also get my social media contacts. You'll get my personal email. And yeah, let's take it from there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. I'll make sure there's links for that in the show notes. And just want to say thank you again for coming on the show, and just for all the amazing information that you shared today. This episode is super awesome, and I'm really stoked about this. So thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. And yeah, again, thank you for the work you do. Thank you for all the work you put into each and every one of your episodes. I'm a huge fan of your podcast. I love listening to it, and I listen to it whilst I'm gardening in my food garden. So I'm multitasking. It's the only thing that I can multitask. But yeah, I really want to thank you for the hard work you're putting in.
Oh, thank you. I love that. That just brought a big smile to my face. All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Di-Di Hoffman. I just feel like this episode is so packed full of golden nuggets. So definitely go check out what Di-Di has to offer, the free resources he offered, and all that good stuff. Of course, everything will be in the show notes, so you can find links and all that there. As always, thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Offering Tree for sponsoring this episode. All right, that's all from me, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.